Sarah sat in the front pew of the small church, listening to the preacher's voice echo through the sanctuary. His words were meant to inspire, but her mind wandered, trapped in the guilt that had been eating at her for weeks. She had a secret, one that could ruin her life if anyone ever found out. She glanced over at her husband, Paul, sitting beside her, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. The secret wasn't something she had planned. It had started as a harmless flirtation with a young man who had joined the church a few months ago. His name was Ethan, and he was everything Paul wasn't: young, vibrant, and full of life. At first, it had been innocent, a few lingering looks and playful conversations after the services. But soon, it escalated. Sarah had never intended to hurt Paul, but she couldn't deny the attraction. She felt for Ethan. He made her feel alive in ways that Paul, her husband of 10 years, no longer did. They began meeting in secret, their interactions growing more intimate with each passing week. It was all fun and games until the night they crossed a line. It was late, just after one of the Wednesday night services, when things went too far. Ethan had invited her to his apartment for a discussion about the sermon. She should have known better, but she went anyway, unable to resist the pull he had on her. They spent the night together, and by the time Sarah left in the early hours of the morning, she knew her life was about to change forever. Now, sitting in the church, the guilt was unbearable. If Paul ever found out, he would never forgive her. But she had no idea that the real danger was just around the corner. Ethan had begun to make threats. He had been demanding more and more from her, threatening to expose their affair unless she agreed to leave Paul and be with him. Sarah felt trapped. She had tried to end things with him, but Ethan refused to let go. He made it clear that if she didn't comply, he would reveal everything to her husband. As the preacher's voice grew louder, Sarah's heart pounded. She was no longer listening to the sermon. Her mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. She couldn't let Ethan destroy her life. She couldn't let him tear apart her family. Little did Sarah know, the person who would help her hide the secret would be someone she least expected. The days following the affair had been a blur for Sarah. She tried to act normal around Paul, but every conversation felt forced. Every touch seemed like a lie. She couldn't look him in the eye without thinking of Ethan, of what she'd done, and of the danger that still loomed over her. It was the following Sunday that everything changed. After the service, as Sarah walked out of the church, she felt a hand gently tap her shoulder. She turned around to find Pastor Thomas standing behind her, his usual calm expression now tinged with concern. "Sarah, can we talk for a moment?" His voice was soft, yet insistent. Her heart skipped a beat. She'd been avoiding him lately. He had always been a good friend to both her and Paul, a man she respected deeply. But in recent days, she had been avoiding him, knowing that he was one of the few people who could see through her facade. "Of course, Pastor," she replied, forcing a smile. "What's on your mind?" Pastor Thomas nodded, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "I've been noticing. You seem troubled lately, and I wanted to check in. Are you doing okay?" It was a question Sarah had been dreading. She couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't confess what she had done. So, she lied, like she had been doing for weeks. "I'm fine," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Just tired, I guess." But Pastor Thomas didn't seem convinced. He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp and calculating, as though he were trying to see through her lies. He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "I know when something is weighing on someone's heart. Sarah," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know I'm here for you." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to cry, to confess everything, but she couldn't. Not here, not now. Instead, she nodded, swallowing her fear. "Thank you, Pastor. I'll keep that in mind." He smiled warmly, patting her shoulder before walking away. But as he left, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something, that he saw through her carefully crafted mask. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The weight of her secret was too much. She tossed and turned, her thoughts consumed by Ethan's threats. She had to get rid of him, but how? The thought of telling Paul was out of the question. It would destroy him. The next morning, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her cup of coffee, the phone rang. She picked it up without thinking, her heart racing as she recognized the number. It was Ethan. "Sarah," his voice was cold, devoid of any warmth. "I'm coming to your house tonight. We need to talk." Her stomach churned. He had been more aggressive lately. and she knew he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But she couldn't let him ruin everything. Not now. Not after all she'd built with Paul. Then, an idea began to form in her mind. It was dangerous, but it might be the only way out. She knew she couldn't do this alone, but there was someone who might be able to help her. Someone who had more experience, with secrets than she cared to admit. Pastor Thomas. The evening sun cast long shadows through the window as Sarah sat in her car outside the church. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her palms slick with sweat. She had made up her mind. She had no other choice. The thought of going to Pastor Thomas filled her with dread. But what other option did she have? Ethan was becoming more unpredictable, more dangerous. She had tried to cut ties with him, but he wouldn't let her go. If she didn't act soon, everything would fall apart. Paul would find out. Her life, the life she'd worked so hard to build, would be shattered. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, walking briskly toward the church doors. As she entered, the smell of old wood and incense filled her nostrils, the familiar scent offering a small comfort in the midst of her turmoil. Inside, Pastor Thomas was sitting at his desk, reading through a stack of papers. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening with recognition. "Sarah," he said with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came. Please, have a seat." She sat down across from him, her legs trembling beneath her. This was it. She had to tell him everything. "Pastor," she began, her voice shaky, "I need your help. I've made a terrible mistake." Pastor Thomas didn't say anything at first. He simply watched her, his eyes filled with understanding. He'd always been a kind man, someone who listened without judgment. But today, there was something different in his gaze. Something darker. "I know," he said softly. "I suspected something was wrong. You haven't been yourself lately." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she realized he had known all along. He had seen through her facade, had known that something was off. She felt exposed, naked under his gaze. I've been having an affair," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "With Ethan. And now, he's threatening to tell Paul." Pastor Thomas didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his hands clasped together in front of him. "Ethan is a dangerous man," he said calmly. "You're right to be afraid." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "What should I do? I can't let Paul find out. He won't survive this. Please, help me." Pastor Thomas was silent for a long moment. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke. "You know, Sarah, sometimes we have to make difficult decisions," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes, to protect the ones we love, we have to take actions we never thought we'd consider." Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. "What are you saying?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "I'm saying that if Ethan is going to destroy your life, then perhaps it's time we eliminate the threat." She froze. "What do you mean? Eliminate him?" Pastor Thomas's expression darkened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know how to make people disappear, and I know how to make it look like an accident. It's not the first time I've helped someone get rid of a problem." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized just how far Pastor Thomas was willing to go. But something in his eyes told her that he wasn't joking. This wasn't a hypothetical situation. He was offering her a solution, a permanent one. "But murder?" she whispered, horrified. Pastor Thomas didn't flinch. "Sometimes, there are no other options. Sarah, you've already made a mistake. The only way to protect your family, to protect Paul, is to make sure Ethan never threatens you again." She sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. Was this really happening? Was she really considering this? I don't know," she stammered. I don't know if I can go through with this." Pastor Thomas reached out and placed a hand on hers. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but his eyes remained cold and unwavering. "You don't have to do it alone," he said softly. "I'll help you. We'll make sure no one finds out." The offer hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Sarah felt trapped, like there was no way out. She had already made a terrible mistake, and now it seemed there was no turning back. "I'll do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Pastor Thomas smiled, his eyes glinting with something dark and predatory. "Good. We'll take care of it. But remember, once you make this choice, there's no going back." The days following Sarah's decision were a blur of fear, anticipation, and cold determination. Pastor Thomas had assured her that everything would be taken care of, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life was spiraling out of control. She had crossed a line she could never undo. Her thoughts often returned to the night of the affair, when she had let her guard down. It had been an impulsive, reckless decision, one that had changed everything. Now, she found herself in a situation far worse than she ever could have imagined. But there was no turning back. Not anymore. The plan had been simple, or so it seemed. Pastor Thomas had told her they would make it look like an accident. Ethan had a history of reckless behavior. He was known to hang out at the local bar, and rumors had circulated about him getting into fights when drunk. It wouldn't take much to convince the authorities that Ethan's death was the result of a drunken brawl gone wrong. Don't worry, Pastor Thomas had reassured her when she expressed doubts. I've done this before. We'll make it clean. No one will ever suspect you. Sarah had agreed, not because she believed him, but because she had no other choice. She was too deep in this mess, too afraid of what would happen if she didn't follow through. But now, as she sat in her car in front of the bar where Ethan often drank, her heart pounded in her chest. Tonight was the night. She was going to meet him under the pretense of talking things out, of finally ending their affair. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was the end of everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her hands shaking. It was a message from Pastor Thomas. Everything is in place. Don't hesitate. You know what you need to do. The words were simple, but they felt like a death sentence. She stared at the screen, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to back out now. If she did, everything she had worked for, her marriage, her family, her life, would be destroyed. She took a deep breath, silencing the voices of doubt in her mind. She had made her choice, and now she had to follow through. Inside the bar, the dim lighting and the smell of stale beer made Sarah feel nauseous. Ethan was already sitting at the far end, nursing a drink and talking to a few friends. He hadn't seen her yet, and that gave her a moment of clarity. She could still back out, pretend she had never come, and walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she walked toward him, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with every step. As she approached, Ethan looked up, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. His smile was almost predatory, the same smile he had worn the first time they had met. She had always been drawn to him, but now she only saw the danger in his gaze. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought we were done with this, but you came all the way out to see me. That's got to mean something." She sat down across from him, her stomach churning. "Ethan," she said, her voice flat, "we need to talk." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Talk? About what?" "This has to end," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep doing this. I've made a mistake, and I need to fix things." Ethan laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think it's that easy? You think you can just walk away from me?" "I have to," she said, her eyes avoiding his. "I'm married. I have a family, a life. I can't keep this up." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, Ethan's expression darkened. He leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can just leave me? You really think I'll let you go that easily?" Sarah felt a cold chill run through her body. She knew then that she was in more danger than she had ever imagined. Ethan wasn't just a man she had made a mistake with. He was a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "You're not going anywhere, Sarah," he hissed. "If I can't have you, then no one will." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The panic began to rise in her chest. She could feel her pulse racing as she thought of Pastor Thomas and the plan they had made. But then, something unexpected happened. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He stumbled toward her, his movements unsteady from the alcohol. "I told you," he slurred. "I'm not letting you walk away. Not after everything we've shared. You owe me." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as he grabbed her wrist. His grip tight and painful. This was it. She had no choice now. She had to do it. Just as he pulled her closer, his face contorted with anger. Sarah reached into her purse. Her fingers brushed against the cold steel of the small, hidden weapon Pastor Thomas had given her, the gun. She had never held one before, never even thought she would. Need to. But now, she knew it was her only way out. Ethan's eyes flicked down to her purse, and for a split second, he seemed to realize what was happening. But it was too late. In one swift motion, Sarah pulled out the gun and pointed it at him. "You don't control me anymore. she whispered. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the bar, a loud, jarring noise that made Sarah's heart race even faster. Ethan collapsed to the ground, his face frozen in shock, his hands still clutching the air where she had been moments before. For a moment, everything was still. And then, reality came crashing down. The silence that followed the gunshot felt suffocating. Sarah stood over Ethan's motionless body, her hand trembling as she held the gun, now pointing downward. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and the world around her seemed to blur. The weight of what she had just done hit her like a tidal wave. She had taken a life. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat like a drum in her ears. She could feel the sweat pooling at the back of her neck, a cold chill running through her veins. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't go back. The bar was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of the music from the jukebox in the corner. No one had moved. No one had seen it coming. Ethan had been a regular here, but now he was gone, lying on the floor with a single bullet wound in his chest. A man at the bar, his face pale with shock, was the first to react. "What the hell?" he shouted, but before he could move toward Ethan's body, Sarah turned quickly and bolted for the door. She couldn't stay here. Not with all these people who could identify her. Not with the sound of Ethan's blood spilling across the floor, still ringing in her ears. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, a stark contrast to the heat that consumed her body. She didn't stop running. She didn't even think. She just ran, her feet pounding against the concrete as she made her way back to her car. Once inside, she locked the door, her hands still shaking violently. She dropped the gun onto the passenger seat, staring at it for a moment, before grabbing the keys and starting the engine. She had to go. She had to get away from this place. But as she pulled out onto the road, the reality of what she had done began to settle in. Her mind raced with thoughts of Paul. How could she explain this to him? How could she ever face him after what she had just done? As she drove through the quiet streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face, the shock, the disbelief. His eyes had gone wide just before the bullet hit, and the way his body slumped to the floor, lifeless. It would haunt her for the rest of her life. Back at the church, Pastor Thomas had been waiting for Sarah's call. He had been expecting it, knowing full well that tonight was the night they would rid themselves of the problem. When the phone finally rang, he answered it immediately. "Did you do it?" he asked, his voice calm, almost detached. I did," Sarah stammered. "I shot him. He's dead." Pastor Thomas was silent for a moment. "Good. You did the right thing. Now we just have to cover our tracks." The words should have been comforting, but instead, they made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. She had followed through with his plan, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a nightmare. "I don't know what to do next," she whispered. "I can't stop thinking about what I've done." "Don't worry," Pastor Thomas said. "You've made sure Ethan won't hurt you or your family anymore. That's all that matters. Now we just need to clean up the mess." Clean up the mess. His words echoed in her mind as she drove through the streets, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and shadow. She had no idea what cleaning up meant, but she didn't want to know. She just wanted to forget. She wanted everything to go back to the way it was before this madness started. But it couldn't. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. When Sarah arrived home, she parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house in front of her. It looked so normal, so unchanged. It was the same house where she and Paul had built their life together, the same house where they had dreamed of growing old. But now, it felt like a prison. She grabbed the gun from the passenger seat and slid it into her purse, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to carry it inside, but she knew she had to. She couldn't leave it in the car. If anyone found it, if anyone connected her to Ethan's death, it would all fall apart. She opened the door and stepped inside, her heart racing as she heard Paul's voice coming from the living room. He was watching TV, completely unaware of the darkness that had descended on their lives. "Sarah?" he called out when he heard the door. "Is that you?" "Yeah," she called back, her voice strained. "It's me." She walked into the living room, and Paul looked up from his chair, smiling as he saw her. "You okay? You look pale." Sarah nodded, trying to mask the panic rising in her chest. "I'm fine. Just tired." "Long day?" Paul asked, his eyes soft with concern. She forced a smile, sitting down next to him. "Yeah, you could say that." Paul reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You've been a little off lately. If something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? Sarah looked at him, his face so full of love and trust, and for a moment, the guilt hit her all over again. She had just killed a man, and now she had to look him in the eye and pretend everything was fine. I know, she whispered. I know. And as she sat there, trying to force the words to come out, she realized one thing. She couldn't keep running. The truth had a way of catching up to you, no matter how far you try to run from it. But for now, she had to hold it together. He asked, his voice calm, almost detached. I did, Sarah stammered. I shot him. He's dead. Pastor Thomas was silent for a moment. Good. You did the right thing. Now we just have to cover our tracks. The words should have been comforting, but instead, they made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. She had followed through with his plan, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a nightmare. I don't know what to do next, she whispered. I can't stop thinking about what I've done. Don't worry, Pastor Thomas said. You've made sure Ethan won't hurt you or your family anymore. That's all that matters. Now we just need to clean up the mess. Clean up the mess. His words echoed in her mind as she drove through the streets, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon and shadow. She had no idea what cleaning up meant, but she didn't want to know. She just wanted to forget. She wanted everything to go back to the way it was before this madness started. But it couldn't. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. When Sarah arrived home, she parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house in front of her. It looked so normal, so unchanged. It was the same house where she and Paul had built their life together, the same house where they had dreamed of growing old. But now, it felt like a prison. She grabbed the gun from the passenger seat and slid it into her purse, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to carry it inside, but she knew she had to. She couldn't leave it in the car. If anyone found it, if anyone connected her to Ethan's death, it would all fall apart. She opened the door and stepped inside, her heart racing as she heard Paul's voice coming from the living room. He was watching TV, completely unaware of the darkness that had descended on their lives. Sarah? He called out when he heard the door. Is that you? Yeah, she called back, her voice strained. It's me. She walked into the living room, and Paul looked up from his chair, smiling as he saw her. You okay? You look pale. Sarah nodded, trying to mask the panic rising in her chest. I'm fine. Just tired. Long day? Paul asked, his eyes soft with concern. She forced a smile, sitting down next to him. Yeah, you could say that. Paul reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You've been a little off lately. If something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? Sarah looked at him, his face so full of love and trust, and for a moment, the guilt hit her all over again. She had just killed a man, and now she had to look him in the eye and pretend everything was fine. I know, she whispered. I know. And as she sat there, trying to force the words to come out, she realized one thing. She couldn't keep running. The truth had a way of catching up to you, no matter how far you try to run from it. But for now, she had to hold it together. She had to act like everything was okay, even if the world around her was falling apart. The days after Ethan's death moved with a surreal, dreamlike quality. Sarah went through the motions of her life, but it felt as though she were watching from the outside, as though she were no longer a part of it. She would wake up, go through the motions of breakfast with Paul, smile when he kissed her goodbye, and then spend the day pacing around the house, trying to keep the panic from rising inside her. The weight of the secret sat heavy on her chest, suffocating her at times. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar phone call, every time someone glanced at her for too long, she feared the truth would spill out. But most of all, she feared what would happen if Paul ever found out. He was kind, loving, and trusting, so trusting that Sarah couldn't help but feel like a fraud in his presence. She hadn't heard from Pastor Thomas since that night. He had told her to lie low for a while, to let the dust settle before doing anything else. But every hour that passed without hearing from him made Sarah more nervous. She knew he had helped her cover up the murder, but part of her was beginning to wonder whether she was now in over her head. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. Sarah jumped, startled by the sudden sound. She glanced at the caller ID. It was an unknown number. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something urged her to answer it. Hello. She answered, her voice shaking. Is this Sarah Collins? The voice on the other end was professional, crisp, and polite, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Yes, she replied, her heart pounding. Who is this? This is Detective Harris from the local police department. We need to ask you a few questions regarding the incident that took place at the old Crowbar 2 nights ago. Do you have a moment? The words hit her like a hammer. She could barely breathe. I don't know what you're talking about. She stammered, her voice trembling. I understand this may be a bit of a surprise. Detective Harris continued. But we're investigating the death of Ethan Walker, and your name has come up during our inquiries. We're just trying to gather information. The air felt thick as Sarah's mind raced. She had to keep her cool. She had to think. I'm sorry, she said, trying to sound composed. I don't know anything about this. I didn't see anything, and I haven't been to the bar in weeks. Are you sure, Mrs. Collins? We have some information suggesting otherwise. The mention of her name sent a wave of panic through Sarah. How did they know? How could they be connecting her to Ethan's death? She had to stop this, and she had to stop it now. I'm sorry, she repeated, swallowing hard. I think you have the wrong person. Perhaps, Detective Harris said, his voice still calm. But I'd like to ask, if you'd be willing to come in for a formal statement. It would be much appreciated. Sarah's world began to spin. She could feel the walls closing in around her, and the secret she had been carrying threatened to come crashing down on top of her. She couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when she was so close to making everything go away. I don't think that's necessary, she stammered. I don't know anything about this, and I've already told you. Understood, Mrs. Collins. Detective Harris interrupted, his voice suddenly taking on a different tone. But I'm afraid we have to move forward with the investigation. If we find out later that you've been withholding information, we will have no choice but to take legal action. Are you sure there's nothing you can tell me? Sarah's hand shook so violently that she almost dropped the phone. The fear in her chest was rising, but she had to keep it together. If she faltered now, it would all be over. I haven't seen anything, I swear, she said, her voice a little steadier. I'm just a concerned citizen. I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't know anything about this. All right, Mrs. Collins, the detective said after a long pause. But we'll be in touch. Please keep your phone on. The call ended abruptly, and Sarah was left standing in the middle of the living room, the silence swallowing her whole. The truth was coming for her. She could feel it. No matter how much she tried to bury it, no matter how far she ran. The consequences of that one fateful decision were starting to catch up with her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Pastor Thomas. I told you it wouldn't be easy. They're on to you. Stay calm. Don't do anything rash. I'm handling this. Sarah stared at the message, her mind spinning. Pastor Thomas was handling it? How? And what did that even mean? She had trusted him, but now she wasn't so sure. She sank into the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. She had killed Ethan to protect her family, but now she was beginning to realize something that terrified her more than anything else. The past never stays buried. It always finds a way to come back, whether you're ready for it or not. It was then that she heard a noise. A knock at the door. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, every muscle in her body tense. Sarah? Paul's voice came from the hallway. Are you okay? She couldn't breathe. Her pulse was so loud in her ears that it drowned out everything else. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and opened the door. Paul was standing there, a concerned look on his face. You're pale, he said softly, his eyes searching hers. What's going on? You've been acting strange all week. Sarah forced a smile, but it was fragile, like glass ready to shatter. I'm fine, she said, her voice strained. Just a little tired. Paul stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Are you sure? I'm sure, Sarah said, the lie slipping so easily from her lips. Really, I'm just fine. But deep down, she knew she was far from it. The lie had already started to unravel, and no matter how tightly she held it together, she couldn't stop the truth from coming out. The next few days felt like a slow descent into madness. Every phone call, every knock on the door, every shadow in the corner of her eye seemed to carry the weight of an impending revelation. Sarah had been living a lie for so long, but now, it felt like everything was on the verge of unraveling. She couldn't sleep. When she did manage to close her eyes, nightmares filled her mind, visions of Ethan's face. Wide-eyed and terrified, his body crumpled on the bar floor. The sound of the gunshot echoed in her ears. a constant reminder of the irreversible choice she had made. And then there was the message from Pastor Thomas. It had been days since his cryptic note, and she still hadn't heard anything more from him. She had tried calling, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Her anxiety was growing, and she felt completely isolated, unsure of what to do next. Then, the worst thing happened. It was a Saturday evening, and Sarah was sitting in the living room, trying to distract herself with a movie. She needed a break from the constant barrage of thoughts about Ethan, Paul, and the police. She needed something normal, something that didn't involve the heavy weight of the past few weeks. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I know what you did, Sarah." Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the screen, frozen. The message didn't specify who had sent it, but Sarah felt a chill run through her spine. Her first instinct was to delete the message, to pretend it wasn't real. But she couldn't. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. She typed back, her voice unsteady as she replied, "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly. "Someone who knows about the bar. About Ethan. About you." Fear gripped her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. She had been trying so hard to bury the truth, to pretend it never happened. But now, it seemed that someone knew everything. Someone was watching her. The text continued, "You should have listened to me, Sarah. You're not getting away with this. Not this time." The message ended with a strange, unsettling silence. There was no further reply, no phone number to trace. It was as though the person who sent it had disappeared, leaving behind only the chilling knowledge that someone else knew her secret. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a sliver of hope. Maybe she wasn't completely alone in this. Maybe this was her chance to finally find someone who could help her finish what she had started. Maybe they were a friend, someone who had been following Ethan's dangerous trail, just as she had. But the thought didn't last long. The hope quickly gave way to an overwhelming dread. If someone knew her secret, then that meant her lies were no longer safe. The walls she had so carefully built,